Right, well, you're all in the right place this morning because I want to talk about visual communications. So I put out the call asking for people who are visual thinkers, doodlers, and actually I want to start off with a little bit about me, just so that we can kind of like set the scene for where this is going and why I want to talk about it, why I'm passionate about it. So I've called the talk, well, the discussion really, Welcome to the Hyperphantastic World of Visual Communications. And I'm a visual communicator. That's something I've done. Well, I went to art college to study visual communications and specialized in graphic design. But I'm really passionate about anything visual, you know, from maps through to, as a child, I've got the books behind us, Winnie the Pooh, Millie Molly Mandy. I would always read the story and then look at the map at the front of the book. And then doing doodles and actually getting told off at school for daydreaming and doodling. Now, I've realized more recently that I've got a thing called hyperphantasia. So I didn't know that this was a thing until I was at an event and somebody said to me, I was talking about my book, and they said, I don't know how you can visualize stuff because I can't see anything. I don't see pictures in my head. I've got this thing called aphantasia. And then I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was curious. So I went and looked it up and found that there was a scale. And at the top end of the scale, this is where you see everything as pictures and your imagination's really, really vivid. And when I heard about that, that then made everything make so much more sense, because I've always said that I hear words and I see pictures and I have maps in my mind. So as soon as you, Mark, said you're in Perth, whoop, I'm flying up to Scotland. It's interesting because you said I'm coming up to Atomicon. And for me, it was like, no, you're coming down, you know? So yeah, I navigate the world through pictures in my mind, through maps, through connecting the dots. So I thought that this might be an interesting subject to explore the world of visual communications, because if you think about it, it was one of the oldest forms of communications. And we know that because, you know, people have found cave drawings. And then if we jump into the Egyptians, they had hieroglyphics. So I'm going to show you, I've got a doodle here that I'm doing on some post-it notes. So just for example, this was one of the Egyptian signs. I don't know if you've seen this before, but it's their sign for ox, but they called oxes alephs. And this was really important to them because, of course, you know, they could use that to plow the land, to carry stuff, to provide food. So this was very important to them. Now, start off with this in Egyptian times. And then over time, it became, the aleph became this. So they've simplified this doodle, this visual symbol down. And then if you turn it around, as if by magic, do you see what happens? Because it becomes an A, first letter of our alphabet. And this fascinated me when I found out about this. So yeah, that's how I would love to start this conversation, with thinking about visual communications from cave drawings through to hieroglyphics through to now we use emojis, don't we? In fact, if you want to, because we're talking about visual communications, you've even got your reactions at the bottom of the screen there. But you know, I have these things for when I go on calls. I just do it old school. So my question to you is about visual communications. What do you think some of the key milestones have been over history, over this kind of timeline? Where have we used visual communications to, you know, quite a powerful way to connect with each other? I'm going to throw that out there. Who would like to catch the ball and play? Yeah, Go on, Mark.
Go on then. Go on then.
By all means, you can unmute and just, just join in with the conversation. Yeah.
This is quite a boring one, I suppose, but it's always stuck in my mind because I studied visual communication and design at uni, so it's something that's sort of close to my heart. But I remember going to lectures and sort of learning about Eric Gill on the London Underground and the maps and the signage for that. And it still kind of fries my brain that he sort of came up with, this visual language that wherever you are in London, it immediately places you in a map that isn't geographical, but you know how to get to where you want to go very quickly just through these kind of simple lines and dots and circles. And also, I mean, I was a big fan of the typography as well. That really stuck in my mind. But it was just that kind of simplicity of there is this one style that explains everything you need to know about what is potentially a very sort of complex journey or route or system. And that's just one that leaps into my mind from the start.
That's a brilliant example. And actually, when things are so simple, we look at it now and we think, well, yeah, of course. But yeah, like you say, it blows your mind to think, how did he distill it down to, colors and, that visual map that actually helps people navigate around the world. And yeah, my favorite thing is maps. I don't know, does anybody else love maps as well? Maps and plans?
Yeah.
I mean, as a child, I remember we used to get the map out in the car. And there was a visual kind of clue with my mum and dad, because my mum would say, oh, we could go along this way. And my dad would always say, does it have gates? Because in those days, roads didn't always have cattle grids. They would have gates. And I've got a twin brother. So one of us would end up jumping out the car, opening the gate, and the other one would end up closing the gate behind the car. And actually, there's a brilliant TEDx talk about maps. I'll have to find I'll find it and I'll send it to you all. But what it does is it talks about maps being sometimes what we do now is we'll look for the fastest route, but actually these guys were talking about the prettiest route, or the one that had the most culture. You might walk past art galleries and stuff like that. So I thought that was quite fascinating that, now we've moved on to sat navs. Quite often we are just picking the shortest, fastest route, but actually what we're missing along the way. So that's a brilliant example. Any more examples of things where you've come across visual communications that you thought, wow, that's fascinating, and it's really helped me navigate the world? I mean, what do people feel about the London Underground map? Does it help you?
Yeah, it's amazing. I keep getting the urge to actually look up the geographical locations. I'd just like to compare that map with the geographical reality out of curiosity.
Yeah. It'll be, I guess somebody's probably done that somewhere, overlaid the map on the world. I don't know if Mark, if you've delved further into this. Oh, yeah, Mark.
Well, I've done that. When I lived in London, I had a big map of London, and I got some of that thin plastic tape and pasted the tube lines in the tube colors on top of the real map, and the distortion between the iconic map. I'm going to be that guy, Mark. It was Harry Beck, not Eric Gill.
You're right. Sorry, Gill just did typography. Yeah. No,
but it's amazing the way that he distorted reality in order to simplify the message to everybody that was using it. And it's been duplicated. I just came back from Copenhagen, and that style of map drawing is the same there. Beautiful, completely different shape, but instantly recognizable. And every city with a metro system has got a map like that now.
Yeah, we even have in the Northeast. Yeah, we've got the metro up here. Ooh, that's fascinating. So that thing that you've just said about distorting reality, then you kind of think, well, if we go back to time, we'll go back to the ancient Egyptians and talking about, my Alephs here, we're reading these visual clues, aren't we? But what if they distorted over time? What if we distorted? So yeah, not everything is how you see it, is it? So what other examples of visual communications have we got to kind of navigate the world?
Well, again, it's related to moving around, but road signs are often universal. And up here, you'll get lots of signs with animals on, warning you of so I guess that's a kind of early version of a emoji, using icons just to get a complex message over very quickly and simply.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you have ones with squirrels on, and what other animals? What are the animals?
Deer, a lot of deer.
Ah, deer. Right. Yes. So
Trains.
That might change through the world.
Frogs.
Like, yeah, when I went to Canada, obviously they've got moose over there, and I didn't realize, again, some of this stuff you see, but you don't picture them. We kind of put a scale on things. So in my head, I presumed that a moose was very similar to a cow. And we'll come back to all of this stuff, but actually they're huge. I didn't realize how big they were. So that's fascinating when you mentioned that. I had to write that down about distorting reality. The pictures that we make in our mind, connecting those dots. Yeah, and of course, this hyperphantastic world, when you're seeing things as pictures or you're experiencing things differently, I didn't realize that there were some people that didn't actually see visual images. So kind of on that scale, I'm just intrigued to know how you perceive visual stuff in your head. I mean, it's hard to communicate that when, we're talking about things that other people can't see. But for example, if you think of a lemon, can you kind of feel like you could touch it? If I'm asking you to think of a lemon, can you kind of move it around? Can you feel a surface? Can you imagine cutting it in half and looking inside and looking from different directions? Can you kind of hear it? Like for me, the surface of a lemon's quite squeaky, because quite often it's got that waxy surface. Can you taste it? And the other thing is, if I say about tasting a lemon, does your mouth start watering? So what's your experience when I've just talked you through that?
First thing I do is I can smell it. Yeah, I can smell.
Oh yes, smell, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I can do all those things. Yeah, I mean, all that resonates with me.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that people can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was surprised.
Yeah.
And I learned they couldn't. Some people can't.
Yeah, and it's not until we kind of like explore this world and start talking to people. So yeah, a friend that I've got, I said to them about an apple, and then I said, think of an apple. Now I've asked that to other people, and then I've said describe it, and they'll go, oh well, it's on the tree, or it's it's a red shiny apple, or I've just taken a bite out of it. And this other friend said apples are red and green, and I thought, oh, that's fascinating. I wonder if they're more on the aphantasia side of that scale, because they've gone quite factual rather than, thinking about it as a picture in the mind.
My wife is I can never pronounce it. She can't picture things.
Right.
So we're like the exact opposite. So I have quite vivid kind of pictures of things, and she doesn't at all. And we didn't even realize this until last year when I first heard the term.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's the same with apples. She'd be like, I don't know, it's just an apple. It's like, yeah, but what does it look like? She was like, I don't know. Like, how would you know what it looks like? Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So you've come across hyperphantasia then. I think it's called aphantasia.
Aphantasia,
Yeah. So tell me then about more kind of visual stuff. If we think about the visual world and navigating it, we'll start talking about the underground. What other ways do we use visual, or do we use visuals to navigate, to communicate? For example, who's drawn on the back of a napkin to communicate a message to somebody. We always used to say back of a fag packet. It's not so much said now, wasn't it? But how many brilliant ideas started off like that? So how do you communicate your ideas?
I once had it was just over dinner, but I was chatting with like a colleague of mine. This was back when I was in a corporate role. And we were talking about sort of our plans for world domination for sort of the team we're running. And we were just sat, as you do, yeah. And we sat and literally we were just using the salt and pepper pot, and that was how we were mapping out our journey towards sort of business success. And it was literally kind of anything we can grab off the table. But it works, and it just sticks in my mind because I always joke with her now whenever I see her. I say, "Oh, yeah, do you remember when we were taking over the world with salt and pepper, condiments of the future?"
Yeah. I love that, condiments of the future. And yeah, we sometimes do that, don't we? We grab the nearest thing, and actually, if you said that this is a whatever, then other people can kind of jump onto that and go, "Oh yeah, that's so." What was the salt and pepper pot? I'm intrigued to know. What were they? What did they represent? Can you remember?
I think it was the two of us. So I can't remember who was salt and who was pepper. But between the two of us, it was kind of you take on this, you take on that. This is what we're gonna. And so it was kind of like a pincer movement of whatever it was we were planning. I can't remember now.
And actually, that reminds me. So when you're talking about that, the other visual that's come to mind is chessboards. Moving things around, pieces on the chessboard. And every chessboard, if you know how to play chess and you know the rules, that each of those kind of pieces have a symbol, don't they? And they have a way that they move as well. So also about communication, visual communications. For me, I see sometimes things communicating as movement. So I've got a TEDx talk and I talk about the word but and because, replacing but with because. So when we want to bring an idea to life, we will sometimes say, "Oh, I'd love to," and then, blank, "I'd love to write a book." The next word that we often say, though, in our mind is, "But I haven't got time to write a book. Who would read my book?" All of this stuff. And for me, I feel like the word but spirals us down. It's like a negative. So I talk about replacing the word but with because. And even when I'm saying it, I can feel myself going, because, uplifting. Because if you say, "I'd love to write a book because," you're then tapping into your passion. So for me, words and sounds and images sometimes have got movement attached to it. And I guess arrows are, the simplest form of that, aren't they? And if you look around your screen, you'll probably see that we've got arrows. Sometimes you've got like the undo arrow or the pointer. So yes, let's start thinking about arrows. Who wants to take this? I'm going to throw the ball back over there.
I'll chip in. I'm not very artistic particularly, but I always communicate with kind of images. I'm a spider diagram person. Like everything that I do has to be written in that respect, even though I'm like more of a writer. So I should, everyone assumes I write lots of long form stuff. I much prefer writing things as diagrams, and I always use arrows. And even if I'm doing it on the computer and using Canva, I hand draw the arrows because it's like the effect of drawing the arrow kind of, it's almost like physically leading you somewhere. And I think there's just something about that. And it doesn't have the same effect if you just use like a clip art arrow and like put it on a thing online. So I really like drawing arrows. So even if I'm doing a spider diagram and it's never lines, it's always arrows, almost like it's creating a little journey. So yeah, I totally get what you mean with arrows.
That's
in that way.
interesting. Wow. Anybody else use arrows? Or maybe if you take visual notes, how do you do you take visual notes, and how do you emphasize things?
I use arrows for my notes. So if I've got to deliver something to someone or I'm waiting for something from them, it's a forward or a backwards arrow in my notes. So I'm looking at my list right now. I've got a few backwards arrows I'm waiting for this morning.
That's a really good visual clue, isn't it? Right? Yeah. So, and then what happens when you get that in? What do you do with that arrow?
I cross it off the list, Anne.
Right.
That one's done.
Right. So again, another kind of visual clue, isn't it? Like a visual shorthand.
Then the ball's back in my court. So now I've got the thing I'm waiting for, my backwards arrow. It's now a forwards arrow again because I've got to do something with it and pass it onwards.
Yeah. So it's interesting, that thing about movement again, isn't it? That we could see how this kind of progresses through over time. What other things are popping into people's heads? Because of course, if you're all visual thinkers, you've probably got fireworks going off. So we're having these conversations.
I've started using digital mind maps.
Yeah,
which is handy.
I love mind maps. You're talking my language here. In fact, as part of what I do, I create mind maps for people. So I call them vision maps and get ideas out of people's heads. In fact, yeah, welcome to my crazy world, because I've got 2 of these. Has anybody seen? The idea came to me from Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters. And I've got a husband that's an engineer. So yeah, I'm really creative and he's obviously very practical. And I was like, John, I've just got this idea, because I was trying to communicate. I was going to an exhibition and I had a table display and I was trying to communicate what it is that I do. But of course you can't see ideas, not until you write them down. So it was like, right, I have pictures of me with clients. So we've got one on our head, and the idea that just like we're communicating between each other, that I can see kind of inside their brain. So yeah, who else uses mind maps? And Cindy, tell me more about that, exploring that world.
I've tried all sorts of different apps. I think the one I'm on now is Mind Node, and I am in the process of setting up a web design template shop, and there's a lot of stuff going on my head and in my head, and things that I need to do, which I don't yet understand exactly how to do them. So I use it for like setting up the shop, and then all the small tasks related to setting up the shop and all the things that I need to learn.
Yeah. It's a great way, I think, of connecting the dots, because you get it out of your head, you put it down there and you've got this, you've got that. Then sometimes they come together and you go, ooh, we've got something new happening here. And I do think as well, your head, we sometimes think that we'll have to keep all of this stuff, organized in our head, and we're juggling around. But really, your head should be a place for generating ideas. It's not for storing them. So getting ideas out of your head and, putting it onto paper, I just think there's something magic happens. I also think there's something, Jem, when you were saying about actually the arrows, and I suppose Mark was doing it as well with clients. For me, between your head and your hand, and I don't know whether it's because it kind of goes through your heart and I think intuition and that, something magical happens when you put pen to paper. So who else kind of feels that as well? That, we can sit there and do this, but what happens when you actually write? Are people still using pen and paper?
Oh, I do, yeah. I was kind of thinking about this, and I think I quite often do get everything in my head first. Like if I have, so I do brand design and illustrations, and it often like really develops in my head before I start sketching stuff out. But I do always, even though I do most of my illustrations, the end product is digital, I always start with a sketch on paper and pencil, and it's often very basic, like almost stick people if I'm drawing people or whatever. Like it's not very, it is, I guess, that thing of like getting the idea out of my head and figuring out how the proportions are, or like what I need to add in, or so yeah, definitely still I always start with the pen and paper.
I do the same, because I find as soon as I go digital, I end up reverting to long form copy and just using bullet points. And if I do things on paper, then it becomes more creative, and like it's almost like I don't know how to be creative digitally. I only know how to be creative on paper.
I think as well
And
when you sorry,
go
go
on,
ahead.
sorry.
I was
I was just going to say I brought.
gonna,
No, you go, please.
This is where ideas are all sparking now, aren't they? I love it.
I think I as well, like if it's pen and paper or pencil and paper, I make mistakes. Where if I do digital, I'm very like, even if I'm writing stuff, or it's like I'll just go like, oh no, that's wrong. I'll erase it and start again, or Control Z.
Yeah,
on
100%.
everything. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jen.
I agree, and actually that really ties into what I was going to say. So I brought that into my personal life recently by I found a doodle journaling course, and I've always struggled with journaling, like, you know, your kind of thoughts and feelings and stuff like that. I've always struggled with it, and because I always want to force myself to write long form copy because I feel more of a writer than an artist, and so I did this doodle journaling course, and the whole first part of it is about how to keep your mistakes, so like, and don't think of them as mistakes, and it was learning to kind of accept what you've drawn, and it doesn't have to be perfect, and so that really ties into your point. But it was great because I do that for work, and I know that I have to do stuff on paper for it to be creative, but I just never thought about doing that in like my personal life. It's been fantastic doing doodle journaling. I've actually had little sparks of kind of things that have really helped me, which I never expected to get just through doing doodles rather than words.
That's amazing, because I was never a like journaling person. I could never get into it. But then I was reading The Artist's Way. I don't know if you heard of that book. I mean, I got a couple pages in and it happened actually. Like, but one of the things that she says you should do is every morning just write down your thoughts, like write 3 pages. And especially when you start off, it's not for reading back, it's not for going back through. So she's almost like, just write 3 pages and then put it in an envelope and almost burn it, kind of thing. Or like just put it in the bin or whatever. But that's like one of the things that I do now. Like every morning I sit down and write 3 pages of just whatever's in my head. Which, yeah, I think as a, more visual person and not a writer, like, it's really surprised me that that's what I do now, even though it's not.
It's like the exact opposite of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find though sometimes that you have to shake things up? So when I was coming up with my TEDx talk, I had lots and lots of ideas. So it might actually, I've got it here. Some of the first ways that I did mine was literally pen, paper, post-it notes. And I put them in this book afterwards. And it was just like almost getting all of this stuff out of my head. And it didn't have the organization at the time. It was just like, what are the kind of things that I want to say? And then for me, post-it notes means that I can move it around and organize my thoughts. But then what happened was I got to a block. So then I took that and then I did a digital mind map. So then I put things onto that. And then I was thinking through the ideas and moving that around. And then I got a block. So then I got the whiteboard out and I was onto that. And then I ended up doing some like presentation slides and stuff like that. So for me, it was still working on the same concept, but actually I was using different ways of communicating it because I had every time I came across that, almost like what they would call writer's block. I don't know whether you experienced that, and actually shaking it up and using a different way of communicating can sometimes help us overcome that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think it's one of those things where you, in your head, you're like, no, I have to stick with it, because if I shake it up or if I do something else, I'm not going to get anywhere. Where I do find like I get probably most of my best ideas when I'm walking the dog, and not like, when I'm away from actually sitting down and trying to get the ideas out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how many of you have had a brilliant idea either in the middle of the night? So yeah, that's the thing we talk about. Middle of the night, you think it makes sense, you write it down, you wake up the next morning, you can't read your writing, or you make a voice note and you go, I have no idea what I was saying, but it made sense in the middle of the night. I've got a bath crayon. So it's like from my daughter when she was little, we used to play noughts and crosses in the bath. And it's, yeah, I think it's probably like bath soap, but it means you can write on the tiles in the bath or in the shower. So if I did have a bright idea, because they're always, and that's the magic as well. You know, how many ideas have you had when you're not thinking about them? And they just come to us.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, hi Jen. Sorry, we can't hear you. We can see the visual.
Yeah. See me moving, but yeah. Sorry, I was just saying my best ideas come around water. I've recently realized. So in the shower, when I'm swimming, or if I'm around water. And if I'm around water, it's not as bad. But if I'm in the shower or swimming, obviously I can't record the ideas. Swimming's the worst because I don't even have my phone. Like I can get out of the shower dripping wet and send a voice message to myself, which is what I usually do. But swimming's really annoying because I've got usually at least half an hour before I even get back towards my phone.
Well, I've got a suggestion
really,
for you. So
yeah,
divers, you can buy divers notebooks and pens, or even pencils, so they're like waterproof. So you can always put that down in your wetsuit. When you have an idea, stop swimming, just do doggy paddle and get the notebook out.
Amazing. I want a like a waterproof wristband that I can just record a voice message on. That would be amazing. But I don't even know if they exist. I've just invented it literally this second. But yeah, and I want an Alexa in my bathroom so I can do the same thing. It's like, Alexa, I've had an idea, record it. Yeah. But I also find if I recreate the water thing, so if I've had an idea when swimming, often it will come back to me in the shower, or it'll come back to me if I'm like walking around water. So it's like your brain just kind of remembers the feelings, doesn't it? And then the memories come back. So if I force myself, I can usually remember it again. But my memory's shocking. I have ADHD and my memory is terrible. So like my working memory. So yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to.
So again, it's about connecting those dots. So have you ever, what I've learned as a technique is if you walk into a room and you've forgotten, you walk in, you go, oh, I've forgotten what I was going to say. You walk out the room and you walk back in. Sometimes that, again, a bit like what you're saying, put yourself back into kind of that space and then it comes to you.
Yeah.
So how do we bring ideas to life then? How do you bring your ideas to life? Sorry, we can't hear you again. There we go. I'm not going to say those words. We got sick of hearing those words, didn't we? You're on mute throughout lockdown.
I think like what I said before, I'd like to just sketch stuff out and then see what actually works, because obviously in my head it often works better than what it does when you put it when you put it on paper.
Do you ever feel like also talking about ideas, I call it breathing life into ideas, so whilst writing it down makes it visual, I find that actually talking through ideas as I'm speaking them into existence, I'm actually finding that they're creating a form now, whether it's because I'm hearing my words and then I'm seeing pictures back in my head and then I'm making sense of it.
Yeah,
I have voice messages work best for me, like or talking to an actual human being, obviously, if possible. But yeah, I find that the voice thing helps, and you're probably right. It's probably because as soon as we speak it, our brains then show us the visuals, or if we hear it back, it's the same thing. So yeah, but that's definitely my go-to thing. I have to tell somebody else an idea, otherwise it's almost like it doesn't exist.
Get feedback.
I find there's an act of decluttering that has to go on. There's lots of ideas worming around in there, and you get them down, whether it's in words or pictures, and then you can reorder that editing process. And I don't know what I would have done before computers, having to write documents or get ideas in a sequence, because you can cut and paste so easily and reorder things. But I find that I just need to get it all out first, and then I can organize it.
That's why I like the digital mind mapping, because you can do that, I think.
Is that a drag and drop thing where you can move your thoughts around?
Yeah.
I like the idea of the post-its. I think I need to start trying to do that, like just write stuff down on post-its, and then.
And it doesn't even have to be post-its as well. You can write it on a piece of paper and then just get the scissors out, and then move things around. So
I think that's where, for me, it often gets stuck. That I like to know the kind of the steps that I want to take from to get to the end point. But yeah, I think I often find I'm too much of a perfectionist if I'm doing stuff and it's not working straight away. And then I kind of just, where if I go well, maybe I just do X, Y, and Z and shuffle it about a bit. And I think that's a good one.
That movement thing, that physical kind of moving things around can sometimes you see different things. And I mean, there is that saying, isn't there, about reading between the lines and things, how we can, I think that there's a lot of things that are hidden in plain sight, and the kind of reveal themselves to you, and it becomes obvious, and you think, why did I not see that? But at the time, maybe we've got our blinkers on and we're just blind to it. And sometimes you've just got to take that step back or look at the big picture, or, to see things a little bit differently from a different perspective. So one of the things I teach is visual marketing, and that's based on old-fashioned window displays. And I talk about why, it was interesting, Mark, when you were saying about grouping things together. So one of the principles that I've put together is the 5-star standard, and it talks about grouping. So for example, if I'm going to buy anything, if I was going to buy this necklace and I went to a department store, I would then be looking for maybe the women's wear department, and then I'd be looking for searching in accessories, and then I might decide to buy it or search for it by type, by color, by price. So now on the internet, it makes it much easier if we're shopping for something, holidays, or a light or something like that you can go on and you can search. There is actually that field, isn't there, often, where it's like, do you want the cheapest? Do you want the one that's got the 5 stars? Do you want so actually we are going through life categorizing things and grouping things together to make sense of the world and to make sense of what it is that we're going to do, what our next steps are, whether we kind of realize that we're going on that journey. So, and some of it is about the visual clues that we see along that, because I see everything as maps. So I see everything as a journey, and it's not always as straightforward. Like you say, you just think, right, I want to get from A to B, but we're going that windy road. But then, a bit like when I was talking about the maps, we think we might program in our sat nav to go from A to B, the fastest route, but actually what are we missing along the way? So I can see you're all deep in thought. What kind of images are coming in your mind now?
It's interesting what you're saying about the journey, because that seems to be pretty well true for all of us. Whatever we do, is you've got a target you're trying to get to, some sort of destination. In my case, I make videos, and I need a narrative to pull people through the video. I know what I need the video to do. That's the target, and I know where I am at the start. That's the mess of ideas, and if I can get all the milestones along the way, then it becomes about how you connect, not what the milestones are, but how you connect. It's that route.
So from chaos to clarity, isn't it? Whereas sometimes we think that we need the clarity to be able to work out what it looks like, but actually it's that messy bit. You've got to kind of sometimes be uncomfortable with the mess before it becomes clear.
Yeah.
So Mark, do you do then storyboards? You know, when you're doing the designs?
But often they're just verbal ones. So there's often not budget or time to do visual ones, or the content doesn't make it easy to visualize the thing you're trying to get across. So I would tend to do a script with one column with the words that you hear and the other column with the stuff that you see. But that might just be written down. And what that does, I put in those big milestones, and then I see what I'm missing in the bits in between. And then there's another layer, which is the creative layer, is how you make that look nice. And maybe you decide on a technique that's different. So with video, it might be drama, or it might be documentary, or whatever.
So it's a bit like when Mark mentioned earlier about typography. You know, for me, different type styles have different feelings and different moods with them. So that's what you're kind of saying. You're putting on then a layer of kind of the mood that you want to convey.
Well, I always talk about skeletons. So you need a sturdy skeleton to support the whole thing. And if you haven't got a good structure, it doesn't matter what you put on it. It's always going to look crap. You need a good solid structure, and then you can hang all the information off it.
Yeah, I really relate to that, Mark. When I do my branding for businesses, my skeleton would be really understanding their business and like their values and who the person is that set up the business. And because I feel like if I were to just create a nice image, that's not going to do the job that the branding is supposed to do. Yeah, I do really relate to that. And I like the visual of the skeleton. I can see like the skeleton with like clothes hangers on it.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think you're not selling a commodity. I've got to shift some units or help a customer sell a product. What you're trying to do is sell a feeling, or a personality, and that's when the design aspect becomes much more important. And sometimes that will override the structure, because you start thinking, well, you're not telling people what they want. You're telling them what to feel.
Yeah. So, and that is really interesting when I talk about visual marketing, window display stuff. And for me, it's a feeling. Not everybody will have that feeling, the same feeling potentially. So I call it the wonky picture on the wall effect when I'm trying to explain what visual marketing is. So I'll say to people, have you ever been into a restaurant and you've maybe sat down for a meal and you've looked up and there's a picture on the wall and it's not hanging straight, it's wonky? So for some people, you'll sit there, you'll be wanting to eat your meal, but you'll be distracted by this picture. And I can only say that it's almost like a vibration, like a feeling. And you go, just got to go and straighten that picture because I can't settle until it's straightened. For some people, so, there will be people that will see it straight away and they'll have that kind of almost like burning desire to straighten the picture. There'll be other people that you'll go, have you seen that wonky picture on the wall? And they'll say, oh yeah, and they'll see it, but they don't necessarily have to go and do something, that they don't feel that they have to take action on it there and then. And then there's other people who you'll mention it and they'll go, which picture? Like that, oh, that picture, not that picture, and they don't really see it. But then I say, whether you can do it intuitively, whether you can do it with a little bit of guidance, or whether you need a tool, so that might be spirit level. I believe that everybody can do visual marketing, like display work, so there's some tools and techniques that I teach. But for me, I'm all about ideas and sharing ideas. So I don't say you must do this, because of course then there's guerrilla marketing. And typically if you put a picture on a wall and it is wonky, you might have people telling you that, or you put it upside down and it attracts people's attention. So sometimes knowing about those kind of rules to break the rules is also a fun thing to do. So what else? What other ideas have been sparked off today's conversation? What do we think the future is of putting pen to paper? Are you going to still do it? Or have you stopped already?
I think people will always do it. I mean, the digital technology has been around for such a short period in comparison to the existence of humans who've been making marks for tens of thousands of years, like your original post-it note with your ox on it. You know, people will always have an urge to make their mark. And if you look at the oldest human marks that have been made they're aesthetic ones, people spraying dye on their hands on cave walls and leaving their mark. That's what people want to do. They want the permanence of a physical thing, not some sort of notional digital thing that will evaporate over time.
That's interesting, actually. I want to pick up on that because I think there's something else there, that because of photography, we don't have to make a permanent thing to have a permanent memory of it. So unlike cave paintings where you had to physically paint the wall with something that wouldn't come off for it to stick around for years, nowadays we can do things like, something that just sparked to my head then was like body art, when people paint themselves, and then obviously they're not going to remain painted for the rest of their lives, but there's always a kind of permanent image of them doing that. So we can get more temporary with our creativity and still have a lasting memory of it, compared to having to find like permanent ways of you know, the actual art we create doesn't have to be permanent, but the memory of it can always be there now because of photography. And I think there's going to be a next step, which is, it's already in lots of fictional like TV shows and stuff. I don't know if you've seen Bones, or I think even Star Wars, the holograms, like there'll be ways of creating art that then becomes 3D, and we'll find a way of recording that so that we can, you know, see kind of 3D images. So instead of having a mind map on a piece of paper or on a digital screen, you'll be able to almost walk through it, and you'll be able to kind of move things around. You can literally almost, you know, use your hand to kind of swipe an arrow into a different place. And then we'll be able to create that, and we'll be able to send that to our clients, and our clients will be able to then walk through the same mind map. And do you know what I mean? I think those are kind of, that's the future of it. And I think it's more about recording the temporary art now rather than finding new ways to create permanent art.
So immersive environments then, where you kind of put yourself in the picture, basically. You kind of
100%.
And
I definitely think that's the future.
Yeah, there is something I'm exploring called endless paper, where, you know, I can take my doodles and then literally go on a journey through them. And I've also created worlds with people that do 3D, so you can go in. I've done an art gallery before with my doodles, and you can go inside that room, and then if you click on the doodle, it'll show a time lapse, or if you click on something else, a video will come up. So yeah, there's it's amazing
like virtual
how things are going to change.
Yeah, we're already started with kind of virtual reality, but I think it will be more accessible and less clunky than that.
Yeah,
I'm dubious about the permanence of it though. I think the tools are there to help you be creative and answer short-term requirements, and all those things you talked about are all in some form or other already happening. Where we talked about mark making and the old school, I'm using a fountain pen still and writing stuff down. We all take photographs, we can all record what we do, but how many of us actually print them out and put them on the wall anymore? And it's interesting to me, the massive explosion of people getting tattoos in a world where their lives are more and more digital. They're trying to make themselves different in a permanent way and express themselves in a permanent way. These are people who maybe not creative in their own right, but they made creative choices about their own body.
Ooh, Mark, I like that one. I never thought about connecting that, because yes, there is a real kind of upsurgence, is there, of people getting tattoos.
It's always been that, I think.
Yeah.
I think people have always wanted to try and find creativity in permanent ways, even if they don't have the skill set. So people who do gardening, they want to leave a great garden. They want to have something that people can enjoy, or those guys down at Halfords on a Sunday putting Go Faster stripes on their cars. That's their form of creativity. Everybody's trying to make their mark. And
I love the fact your name's called Mark as well. I mean, that hasn't. I just think, wow. Yeah,
I don't think that was planned.
Called Mickey Mark, have you yet? I think there's a book in your mark. Make your mark. But that is fascinating.
I'm interested that we all do something creative in our roles, but whether outside our work, we do things that are creative and try and leave our mark that way.
I just want to pick up on that, because I definitely think that whilst, yes, I definitely agree with you, and I think the tattoo thing's really interesting. And what I would say is there's been an upsurge in sales of things like Polaroid cameras, so that people really can have a physical photo and put it on the walls. That is actually increasing, not decreasing now. I actually do think that temporary art is becoming more, because it's immersive, it's about the experience, the experience of creating it, the experience of being there. We're fascinated as a species with creating memories, leaving our mark, leaving our legacy. But why do we have, like, why is that such a big thing? I think people are less interested in leaving their own personal mark on the world. I think people are more interested in having the experiences and leaving the world as the legacy, rather than having to have their own little bit on it, if that makes sense. So I don't disagree. I think there's room for both things, but I don't think it is just about leaving your mark and having a permanent thing. I think there is joy in just creating the art, even if you then wash it straight away. So sandcastles, think of sandcastles. We've been building sandcastles since we were younger. Did we take photos of them? Do we have vivid memories? No, but we reveled in the joy of making the sandcastles, and part of that was about the art of it.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love all these different perspectives. The other thing is, when we started putting pens up, do you all have a favorite pen, or is it just me? Because certain pens I feel like writing with are much nicer than others. So I call this my magic pen. So yes, we've all kind of got pens in our hands, haven't we? But yes, kids building things like sandcastles. I believe that everybody is creative, and the amount of times that people say to me, I'm not creative, they're in different ways, you know. So it might be that, like you say, they do the garden, or they might bake a cake or something like that. And I think sometimes people relate creativity to that thing about where they say, I can't draw, or somebody's told them that they can't draw, and then they go, oh, I'm not creative. But we'll come up with ideas, we'll come up with, you know, solutions to problems. So I believe everybody's creative in different ways. So the question is, before we kind of wrap up today, how are you creative? I'm intrigued to know, how are you creative?
I like to say that I think creatively. So I don't draw. I was the person who, you know, went through for about 30 years saying, I'm not creative, I can't draw, I can't paint, like I'm terrible at art. I took art and I'm not very good at it. But then I realized my whole life I've been doing creative pursuits. It's just usually things I used to do, like collages as a kid. That was my thing, like cutting bits out of magazines and putting them together. But I'm a writer, and I also, my entire job is thinking creatively and seeing, I say I'm a creative problem solver. So no, I don't do graphic design or anything like that, but I'm definitely creative, and I'm owning that now. But yeah, I was definitely that kid who thought I wasn't creative because someone told me I couldn't draw. 100%.
And you kind of go, well, in comparison to what are they comparing you to? Because I had that, and you know, I have got, my TEDx talk actually talks about this journey, because I said when I did a doodle at an event, oh, that's rubbish. And then other people are saying it's brilliant. Now, I just did this visual note taking for myself. I mean, I now do it as a business because everybody was like, it's brilliant. And I was like, it's rubbish. But you know what? I couldn't understand for a while why it was rubbish. For 25 years, I did Christmas displays in shopping centres. And to instruct the illustrators, who are, say, world-class illustrators who've gone on to work for Disney and stuff, I would draw a doodle. But then I realized that actually when I handed it over to them, what did they do? They crumpled it up and threw it in the bin. So it actually became rubbish. And I told myself that my drawings were rubbish. But what they did was it actually transferred an idea from my head into somebody else's, who could then illustrate it. So sometimes when we say we're not creative or we can't draw something, we're comparing, we're doing that comparison thing. But actually, it's what is the purpose, you know, and has it kind of ticked that box to move an idea forward? And we've been talking about movement and the arrows. I love how we're kind of going full circle here. It is about moving things forward, isn't it? So how are you creative, Cindy?
Well, I'm a graphic designer and web designer. So I create logos and websites, but I actually don't often do anything on the side. And this talk reminds me that I need to do that.
Ooh,
Yeah.
so how are you
Yeah.
going to create? What do you think that's going to look like?
There's part of me that would like to be an illustrator. So I'm interested in doing an online course on illustration or going to a college to do a course and actually do watercolor, pen and ink, that kind of thing.
Just reminded me, yeah, when I did A-level art, that's what I used to do, pen and ink. Gosh, never done that for years.
Yeah.
We sometimes forget about this stuff, don't we? And we'll leave it behind. I now arrange what I call play days with my friend. And you know, sometimes I've got a fairy. We went off and we made a fairy one day. You know, we tap back into that creativity, that childhood curiosity, because it can unlock things that maybe have you know, we've put to one side. And by doing that, unlocking your creativity, it can lead to other things. It can unblock you from something that maybe has been holding you back.
And yeah.
Ooh. So I'm obviously aware of time that we need to wrap this up. Just going around the room, final thoughts on visual communications, getting ideas out of your head, making them visible. Have you got any final?
I have to go, sorry, but bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Jen. Final thoughts, Mark, on making your mark?
No, if I have any final thoughts, I think we're all thinking along the same lines. I think what's interesting what you said about being told you couldn't draw, so therefore you weren't creative. I think we've all had some sort of experience like that, even if we felt it about ourselves. It's a bit of a curse, I think, having a creative mind, because once you've realized it, you kind of have to keep fulfilling it. And
the curse
of the
creative mind.
Sorry?
The curse of the creative mind.
Well, I know it's not really a poor me thing. I think it's just a statement of fact that there's always something missing, or you know, whatever you're doing, you maybe want to do something that's a little bit more than just functional. But the thing I think was really stuck in my mind is that there's always someone better. So I'm sure, you know, Michelangelo used to be jealous of other sculptors. There'll always be someone better at what you do. The main thing is to enjoy the process on your terms. Yeah.
Enjoy the journey. Brilliant. Well,
back to
on that final note, shall we wrap this up? It's been fantastic talking to you, and we'll spark more ideas when we get to Atomicon, because I'm sure we could have a lot more in-depth conversations. So it's been brilliant. Thank you for coming along and playing with me and talking about visual communications, and let me see a little bit into your world, into your mind, and how you create what you do. Well, thank you, and we'll see you soon. So I'm just gonna end with this one. I'm gonna give you a round of applause and say thank you.
Thank
Bye.
You. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Anne.